William the Conqueror came from Normandy. He won a battle and the rest is history. The Doomsday Book recorded all the things that now were his, and his family ruled England for 1,000 years. When William fell off his horse and snuffed it back in Rouen, people said the king is dead, long live the new one. William's son William became King Willie too, till he took an arrow in the chest while hunting with his crew. Willie had no heir, so some thought it was a plot by his brother Henry to have King Willie shot. No one knew for sure, but no one really missed him, so Henry became king and reformed the legal system. Henry wasn't famed for equality and fairness, but when he named his daughter Matilda as his heiress, the barons moaned that Henry had gone woke and backed her cousin Stephen, who was useless but a bloke. Matilda fought back and anarchy was rife, till Stephen did a deal to stay as king for life. But when he died, Matilda's son Henry of Anjou would take over from him as Henry number 2. England as well as most of France, but Richard I preferred the Holy Lands. He went crusading and never made it home, so his brother John was next upon the throne. King John had more trouble with the barons, who made him sign a charter limiting his powers. John resisted for a bit, then died of dysentery, and his 9-year-old son became Henry number 3. Henry reigned for half of the 13th century, but the barons kept on trying to constrain the monarchy. An early form of parliament started to take root, and from now on the king was no longer absolute. Henry's son Edward I fought the Scots and hammered them. They fought back and beat his son Edward II at Bannockburn. Edward was deposed and replaced by Edward III, whose war with France lasted a century. Richard II dealt with rebel peasants, but his cousin Henry Lancaster was a bigger menace. Henry toppled Richard and became King Henry IV, and Henry V beat the French at Agincourt. Henry VI was crowned before he could even walk, but he got overthrown by some relatives from York. Ensuing civil war spanned the reign of Edward IV, and Edward V did not survive for even 3 months more. Richard III was the last Plantagenet. He died in battle and his bones were used as aggregate. Lancaster and York had no more need to feud, cause under Henry VII they all became Tudors. Henry VIII had half a dozen weddings, a couple of divorces and a couple of beheadings. Edward VI was Henry's only son, but he was a sickly child and he didn't live long. Queen Mary's reign was short and very bloody, and Queen Elizabeth wouldn't marry anybody. A new king was needed, the Scots said they could do it, so the Tudors were succeeded by the House of Stuart. James survived a plot to blow up Parliament, then Parliament found King Charles in contempt when he stormed the Commons and had MPs arrested. The divine right of kings was forcefully contested. Charles fought the Roundheads in the Civil War. He lost and his own head tumbled to the floor. Cromwell didn't take the crown but ruled as a lord, and a few years later Charles II was restored. Charles was into actresses, especially Nell Gwyn, but he had no kids by marriage, so his brother James stepped in. As a Catholic, James was not considered optimum, so William of Orange came over to topple him. William and Mary ruled the land together, and Parliament agreed it should stay Protestant forever. So when neither Mary nor her sister Anne produced an heir, George arrived from Hanover. Willkommen, mein Herr. This new German king was an infrequent visitor, so he appointed the first ever Prime Minister. George II quashed a Jacobite rebellion, and George III lost America to the Americans. When his dad went mad, Prince George took the regency, but as George IV, he was crippled by obesity. When he died, his brother became Willie number 4, and then William's niece was Queen Victoria. Victoria was unamused by any sort of levity, but what she lacked in jollity, she made up in longevity. When her husband died, she spent 40 years in mourning, and she died as the 20th century was dawning. Democratic government started to be strengthened during the reign of Edward VII. In the First World War, George V took a new surname so people would ignore that his family was German. That's how the kings and queens, princesses and princes became the British institution we call the Windsors. Edward VIII quit no sooner than he'd started, which is just as well, cause he rather liked the Nazis. His brother reluctantly became George VI, and when he died his daughter became Queen Elizabeth. Now history has finally caught up with the present as Charles III replaces Elizabeth II. 30 generations since William conquered us, his direct descendants still rule over the commoners. I wonder what in 2066 people will think looking back at all of this. Will the head of state be chosen on merit? And will they pay taxes on the wealth that they inherit? Will the barons ever be evicted by the peasants? Or will we just get William V and George VII? History moves slowly, like tectonic plates. You only notice it on a few historic dates. The arc of history can be very, very long, but history is where kings and queens belong.